computer. Welcome back to the Other Side Lifestyle with Jim and Aram. We have today a guest that is going to help you break through all of your barriers. He's going to help you with your behavior change. And the best part is you're not going to have to pay him. The only person that has to pay Aram or pay Ed today, our guest is Ed Nissen, is Aram. Because Aram, if you listen to all of our episodes, likes to get, use this time as like a free consultation, business coaching, social media experts. And now, because times are tight, so he's going to get a free maybe therapy session. And if we can get Aram to cry about his childhood, then he will owe our guest today $19.50. It's going to be awesome. So
not gonna be hard to get me to cry today.
So we got me from Jersey, we got Aram from San Diego, and then Ed, are you in South Carolina?
I'm in North Carolina, around Charlotte, North Carolina. But if you hear the accent, it's because it's by way of Mississippi. So, or we like to say Mississippi.
Mississippi. I like it. It's sexy. We get turned on very easily on this show. It's a problem. It's probably rooted to our childhood. We'll find out today.
I may be in over my head then. I don't know.
Well, tell us about you, about what you do, about if there's anything that you feel kind of in your career that you've maybe shifted towards a certain niche or not, or, anything new, exciting with you. And then we'll figure out from there where we're going to go. I'm going to keep pausing while he drinks his water. All right, we're good. So tell us about you. How long you been doing this, blah, blah.
So how long have I been in mental health? I'm a bit of a late bloomer. I'm 40 years old, so I've been doing this in some form or another for about 12 years. I probably bring a bit more interesting life experience to the table as a clinician, just because of some of the things that I've been through. And so just different traumas and tragedies, and certainly we all have experienced trauma to some degree or another, but I've got some pretty insane aspects to my story. But now I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, just to sort of hurry up and bring us to present day Ed, right? And so I own a private practice in the Charlotte area. I have a few clinicians that work for me, and so if I had a specific niche, if you will, it would be male psychological development in the context of relationships. And that's something I can get into. And it's a bit of a mouthful, but basically it's psychological development that's geared towards men, but through the framework of relationships, particularly long-term relationships, marriage, and things like that.
Okay. Wait, relationships are supposed to be long-term?
Some. I mean, maybe not with the cashier at the gas station, right? But
she sounds hot.
I've been doing it all wrong, Ed. That's probably why I'm unfulfilled.
Yeah.
Well, that's why he can't help you, because he's niched to the people who their patterns from relationships. You have nothing that he can help you with.
Ed, first question: is anybody beyond repair?
Is anybody beyond repair? I don't know. I like to think not. I think my attitude should be that no, I think we're all salvageable.
Yeah.
And here's something I think is interesting. Last year, it's just kind of a fun, casual conversation, but someone asked me almost jokingly what my superpower was. And without really even thinking, I immediately responded by saying redemption. And I've climbed out of hell a couple of times in my life. And even though I sort of gave you this very specific niche of my work, you could say on a more generic scale, it's I help people redeem themselves, to pull themselves out of hell, so to speak. And so,
I love it.
Kind of like I'm becoming the guy when nothing else has worked, go see Ed.
Yeah.
And so
wow,
it's kind of becoming a pattern.
I mean, that says a lot, because I think every therapist it's like every coach thinks they can help their client. Every therapist probably thinks they can help their client. But when you've been shuffled around from practitioner to practitioner, is it the practitioner or is it you?
Yeah. What's the common denominator, right?
Yeah.
Well, how much in your role, your experiences are, like you said, allowing you to really help people? How much would you ever share any of those things when you're with somebody in a professional setting?
Yeah, so I'm taking this question from a clinical perspective, and so I probably need to preface this
We
with
won't report you to anybody if you're not supposed
Sure,
to
Yeah,
do
yeah.
that.
sure. Well, you learn
HIPAA's a real thing.
you learn how to get diplomatic
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
want to last in this industry, I'm sure. But we're sort of encouraged to stay away from self-disclosure. I'm not going to say
Yeah.
we're outright discouraged, but you could see that the tendency for a lot of our education and training around that is like, be careful. We're really
Yeah.
caution against that. But I would say that's one of the things that I have found most beneficial in my work. And so by disclosing parts of my own story,
Yeah.
I think that's really allowed other people to believe that they can also do that. And so at the end of the day, we're two human beings in this office.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm an expert. I have a title. There's, you pay me, whatever. But at the end of the day, I'm another human being. And it's like, if I forget that, then it's all my work will be in vain. So
Yeah. I feel like that would help build trust. I mean, to me, because I have never gone to therapy. I, for years, feel like I should. I just never
I can
pulled the
tell. I
trigger.
can tell.
Yeah. But so that's where it's like, to me, it seems like it would, help build trust. I was just curious, as you knowing that your background, I think, is, like you had said, it would help be able to help people who've maybe been through something similar. If that's a no, or, you kind of pepper those things in, but
Yeah, I mean, you have to use wisdom with that, of course.
Yeah.
You don't want to just make it about you. I've had experiences as a client with a therapist who really started talking about their own problems, and just immediately was turned off by that and felt like, I won't say hopeless, but like, well, this guy's going to help me because he's got his own stuff out and he's trying to do it here on my dime, And so,
yeah. Like, it sounds like he still hasn't resolved his issues and he's like letting them all out.
I think it's probably worse on the other side of the coin. It's like the fact that I'm paying you at least $120 an hour, and you're starting to talk to me about, as long as that spiel comes with a tactic of some kind, sure. But if you're just talking to relate and to build trust, let's expedite that process because we're on the clock here.
Yeah.
Good point.
This guy did not do what he was supposed to do with that.
Was he? Let me ask you a question. Was he from the South?
He was.
Okay. Well, I mean, there's an element there because the South likes to build watches and not tell you what time it is, from my experience.
I might need to hear more about this. This is
Well, no, I'm from the East Coast. I'm originally from like New York metro area. And
Okay.
you talk to a therapist up in New York metro, and it's like, boom, 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 you're fucked up because of XYZ. Let's get right to the point. They almost want to squeeze in like 90 minutes of treatment in 60 minutes and probably even get you out in 45.
Well, what's funny is it's sometimes I'll tell, friends and relatives a little bit about what I do and how some of the dynamics here. But one thing that I experienced for a long time, and I've gotten used to it now, but there have been so many times where I was surprised at the end of a session when a client wanted to come back, because my thinking is, I just handed your ass to you. And I say, so do you want to come back for a second session? And they're, yeah. Can I come next week? And so they're really eager to come. And so they get this thing with me, but I think that's part of what may set me apart in a sense than a lot of therapists in my industry is, it's just that right there. I'm not going to hold back. And you learn how to do that and still do the stereotypical therapist things of active listening and paying attention and meeting the client where they are. Those are sort of popular terms there. But at the end of the day, it's like, well, what are we here for? And sometimes we need a rude awakening, a jarring experience to really jolt us.
Quit beating around the bush and get to get to the issue. What was maybe the path where you kind of niched down to this? Because I know too, you wrote a book. You're in the process of working that out. How did that unfold? Was it just through the certain clients that you had, or did something specific happen that kind of transitioned to this? And obviously this stuff still applies to women if you're talking about the relationship between men and women. So I'm sure I know you still work with women and all that. It's not like this is all I do and all I help with, but how did that kind of unfold?
So it really started out as a personal transformation as a man in a marriage for myself, because I realized that although I wasn't a bad husband per se, I was certainly not reaching my potential, and I was slacking in a lot of areas. And ultimately, it's like I had gotten the family, I'd gotten the wife, and a child, and a career, and little did I know that I sort of didn't have any goals beyond that as far as my own psychological development or even spiritual development. And it caught up with me, and so it started creating a lot of unnecessary suffering within my marriage. And so fortunately, I became aware of that, and I immediately went to work on myself. And so now I kind of took an unconventional path, and I say that as a therapist and clinician. So and I really improved, and I'm still on this journey, but I immediately made some gains there psychologically. And after that, or once I kind of got some progress and momentum with myself with that, I started seeing some of these same problems with the men that I saw as clients. And so, but because my path personally was a bit unconventional, and what I mean by that is it wasn't evidence-based practice. And so as a clinician, you have to sort of operate within evidence-based practice. And
You went to Peru and did ayahuasca.
Something like that, maybe. Probably not far off. And so, and not to, I don't mind divulging into it.
Yeah. No, you don't.
I take deep dives into everything. So if I get into something, like, I explore all avenues down as far down as I could take it.
Yeah.
And so some of those avenues are a bit controversial. And for instance, like red pill, that was you find that. And so that's when I discovered a lot about that movement, if you will. But so I drew things from all kinds of different avenues that really weren't, at least at that time, to my knowledge, supported by any research or evidence-based practice. And so, bound by that ethical obligation, I figured I need to figure out like what I'm doing so that I can apply that clinically in my office with my male clients. So that forced me to really read literature and research to support that. And man, that really blew up for me in a positive way, because it enriched my understanding of that whole process of psychological development as a man. And so this book that you mentioned, I'm trying to get this thing published. So it took me about 3.5 years to write, and I kind of call it a dissertation. So I'm a master's level social worker with a clinical license. So, but with that comes a lot of studying psychology. And so it's so I don't have a PhD, but I kind of call it my equivalent to a dissertation for a PhD program, because I kind of had an idea of what I was trying to understand. And by the time that I finished the manuscript, I knew 10 times as much as what I started out with. And so, but what it really started out is, okay, I'm applying some evidence-based practice based on my personal experience and how I'm seeing with men. So having some success of translating that to my clinical work. And I thought, well, I need to write this down, to put it on paper, just so I can have some idea. You know how it is, like you put it on paper and you understand it better. I thought I'd maybe write 2 or 3 pages. Well, 80 pages later, I realized like this is a book. And so that's the nuts and bolts version of that story. But really became this very meaningful project for me. And so it's a bit different because it gets really technical, but it involves a lot of different perspectives as a way to really have a emboldened understanding of your own process as a man. But I've even had a few women, including my wife, to read the manuscript, and they seem like blown away by it, and that has been really helpful for them. So to your comment earlier about, there's sort of this focus on men in a way, but women certainly benefit from my expertise in that field.
Well, I believe that there's a void in the mental health space when it comes to dealing with males. Just like there's what we deal with as health coaches is the blatant misinformation being targeted towards females. And I think in the mental health space, you have this just very general and very large void of, well, men are supposed to be wired differently, and we're supposed to be tougher, and we're not allowed to cry, and we're not allowed to have problems, and just bury it under your boots and let's keep walking. And the coping mechanisms that we have as men, I think either you're forced to evolve, or you go back to the 20-year-old version of yourself who just buries it deep down with a substance or something to numb whatever you're feeling and just keep moving. And at some point, it's got to have to bubble up and create a really large problem. And if that doesn't get dealt with, fast forward to my 75-year-old father, that's what you get. You get somebody who just lives their entire life without ever having any coping mechanism whatsoever. And then it just turns into this really big problem that other people now have to deal with, which is like, I think if you don't work on your mental health, it's not even almost about you anymore. It's how you exist in space and in life.
Yeah.
Like, you owe it to the rest of the world to deal with your own shit, because if you don't, other people will have to clean it up.
Well, here's a notion, right? It's like, we are going to be a burden on people. What kind of burden are you going to be?
Some way or another, sure.
Burden, or just nothing that just sucks the meaning and life out of everyone around you.
Yeah, but
I never want to inconvenience anybody. I just want to stay out of everybody's way.
Ooh, that's where we can get down into the therapy session 1. Why is he such a people pleaser?
I'm not a people pleaser. I just stay away from them in general.
That's why you're so appealing. That's
right.
My favorite thing about you is not seeing you. I'm
so happy that you're so far away.
Everybody makes people smile. It's just whether you come into a room or leave it. And it's when you leave it that I smile.
Yeah, because you're looking at my hindquarters.
That's true. It is a beautiful glute. Well, you were going to say something, Ed. You said, think about this.
So, you're right to point out how we're in so many ways taught to suppress the emotions, to avoid them, to push them down, to toughen up and deal with it. The problem that I've seen in my clinical experience is that it's the way that men are taught to process once they are open to learning coping skills. And what you might say is that, well, let's not forget those very fundamental differences between men and women. And so, okay, men and women are more alike than they are different.
I forgot to say trigger warning when you started talking about the differences.
Insert trigger warning now.
Right? Trigger warning. He's going to say that men and women are different. Go ahead.
That's right. That there are fundamental differences, evolutionarily speaking, biologically, psychologically, and I think it's unwise to ignore those differences, because some of them are profound in a sense that if we understand those, then we can really, what would you say, optimize the way that we learn coping skills and practice them, so to speak. And so you could say, in a particular psychological perspective here, that there are feminine and masculine dynamics here. And so you might say that typically men, their dominant function is masculine and their inferior function is feminine. So yes, we all have both.
Yeah.
And so, but the thing is that as a man, you have a masculine process to deal with emotions and the world and the struggles and suffering and things like that. And you can observe women in their process, typically speaking, as a lot different than that. And what happens is that, let's say in my industry, this is a helping profession. It's dominated by women, and that's okay. But you can imagine that, well, it's probably likely that the process that they project onto men is a very feminine process. And what happens in that is that we don't realize that we're actually teaching men to process emotions in a way that isn't really optimized for them. And I'm glad that we're trying to teach men to, cope with emotions and to mature psychologically and emotionally and things like that. But the problem is that we're basically teaching men how to act like women when it comes to processing emotions. And the thing is, it's like, you could look at any male-female relationship and marriage and see that as soon as the man starts wallowing in his emotions, like, she does not like it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how do you process emotions as a man? And, that's, you could take a deep dive into that. But I think the important thing to note with that is men do have a particular way of processing emotions, and it is different in a lot of ways than what women do. And so you have to really know how to process those kinds of things as a man. That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a way that you could even attempt in a short form to give a brief idea of how that might look different. But I know that, I think we know for the most part with women, it's going to be more verbal. They're expressing their feelings. It's this outpouring, a lot of venting, all that kind of stuff. Men tend to hold it in. I had a post last summer, the summer before, saying a fart is a physical representation of us holding our emotions in type of, or our emotions, however I worded it. Hold it in too long and it's going to get violent. And that was kind of like we hold it in, and then we don't know how to process it. We don't know how to process it. So I don't know if there's any way without going into a deep dive. I mean, we can, but I did want to talk about the behavior change aspect of things so that everybody can kind of benefit. I don't know. Is there a way to even
let me back you up for a second, because I think the distinction between the masculine and feminine energy as it pertains to the way that we deal with problems is hugely important, because as somebody who works with 95% females, the conversations that I have with females versus the conversations that I have with males are wildly different.
Yeah.
And the way that females learn, the way that females take accountability to their own actions, the way that they're able to justify things, the way that they're able to connect to certain things like eating, like moving their body, like honoring their own belief systems is completely different than a man. With a man, it's much more linear. It's like, I know I have X to do and I have this only way to do it. With a woman, it's like you have a lot of different roads all leading to the same place. With a man, it's literally, this is the highway and I'm just taking that thing all the way there, and there's not going to be any shortcuts.
Men are like waffles, women are like spaghetti. Analogy thing from forever ago. Anybody ever heard that?
Never heard that before.
I'm old.
Yeah.
What can I say?
Are you you are the oldest one.
Yeah, it was like men are like waffles, everything's grid organized, like separate, and women are like spaghetti, like it's all intertwined, all the different things. It was back during the Men Are From Venus, Women Are From Mars book era. But anyway, you asked the question or said something.
No, I think that's an important distinction to make, because that's going to absolutely dictate how things are going to get resolved. Because if you're coming at it from an angle that doesn't make sense for that individual, then you're already speaking to them in a way that they're not going to be able to comprehend and apply it.
I think one thing that's helpful to understand with that is, well, maybe you start with what's your orientation regarding your coping skills and the way that you process life and the emotions that come with it, right? And so one thing that I tell men a lot of times is, okay, cry, complain, vent, talk about your struggles, talk about your suffering, but you better come from a place of strength. And so that's more about an orientation, right? And so, well, the contrast to that is that if you come from a place of weakness, and so that might present a new notion for a lot of men, because to cry from a place of strength, well, that seems almost like an oxymoron, right? And so, but it's not. And so what it is like, well, what is my orientation? It is a solution. It is to grow. It is to improve. But also it's to fully acknowledge the challenge and the struggle here too. But also I'm owning it, and here's my solution, because there are implications to that too. So especially from a woman's side, it's women are really good at seeing the implications, for better or worse, with a man's behavior. And so they'll tell you. So this is kind of how did I used to say that? It's like there's this narrative that that can really be harmful in our society. It's like women will say, "You need to step up and be a man," but then a man tries to step up and be a man, and then we're ridiculed for it, like,
for being dominating,
Mr. Manly man,
patriarchy. Yeah.
So we're sort of pinned against ourselves in that sense, and so there is something to that, right? And it's like, this sucks. But I'm not telling you this so you can fix me. I need you to know that. I'm not telling you this because I depend on you. I'm telling you this because I need to be open with you. We're here to share our lives together. And I'm not going to wallow around in it. And that's what I tell men too. It's like, we don't function well if we wallow in our emotions, right? We need to feel them, but we need to sort of have an understanding of what our orientation is with that. Like, how can we give that meaning? And we have our own way of doing it. Where you might say with women, it's like they almost process the experience in the moment for the sake of processing it. They feel for the sake of feeling it. And you could say that they need to sort of swim in their emotions. And I'll often tell guys, I say with their wives too, if your wife comes home and she's complaining about some coworker, you might have a tendency to be like, well, baby, I'm sure that she was, probably had a bad day and it was a fluke, and you're trying to help and you're trying to alleviate the pain, but the emotional distress, but what you're actually doing is diminishing her emotional process, right? And so I tell people, stir the pot, like, call her a bad name, even if she's not doing that. And she might be like, yeah, she is that. And she's really riled up and she's actually more upset than what she was. And you made her more upset. But what she does is she gets to experience the fullness of that. And then invariably she'll be grateful for you afterwards. And she'll know that you don't really feel that way, but that you were creating that space for her.
I like that. Literally was my life 10 minutes before we got on. A drama going on at work, and my wife's telling me about something. And I'm like, you fuck that bitch, like fuck that bitch. Like I was like, all that stuff. And she handled things great, whatever. But that as you're saying that, it's reminding me of the movie White Men Can't Jump.
Oh God.
Rosie Perez, Woody Harrelson.
You've dated yourself twice already,
I know. So. I'm mid-40s now, baby, I'm thirsty. He gets the water, brings the water out. She goes, why'd you get me the water? You said you were thirsty. I got you water. I do not need you to solve all my problems. And I tell you, I am thirsty. You need to ask me, what makes you thirst? Well, if I tell you I'm thirsty, get me a glass of water. It was great. But it's exactly that kind of thing. We're busy trying to solve women's problems. And sometimes we just need to be in it, let them experience and explore all those feelings. And I think what you said too was great about with men, like doing it from a place of strength or weakness, if I'm hearing that correctly, because we talk about all the time, our perspective on things. Our perspective changes everything. If I am vulnerable and I'm feeling like this is coming from a place of weakness, it's not going to sit well with me, and then I'm going to shut down vulnerability. Would that be kind of what you are saying? Like, no, I didn't feel good with this feeling. I felt too vulnerable. I felt weak in that space. So therefore I should not be having those feelings. And now I become more of a locked up individual.
Yeah. It's a mindset. It's an attitude, right? And so that's why I'd say, I really like the term orientation, because it's like, what's my North Star here? And that sort of helps dictate what I do in the moment. And so so you mentioned vulnerability, and I think the common accepted definition of that is weakness, right? This you're exposed, and now you're going to be destroyed. But if you look up the definition, and you know how some words have multiple definitions, and one that I like that really sticks out to me and it says capable of being wounded. And I think that's interesting, because it's like, well, why do we need to be capable of being wounded? Because it's like, to get from here to there, where we could be, we're probably going to have to go through some chaos, some rough territories. We might take some hits. We need to be able to take some blows, right? And so to me, that capable of being wounded, but that's an attitude around vulnerability. But if you look at vulnerability as this weakness and you're going to be destroyed, well, that's probably what's going to happen. And you can watch, if you process your emotions with your woman, so to speak, from a place of weakness, invariably it's not going to go well. Even if she acts like it in the beginning, it's going to turn her off. Like, she's going to be thinking about it, and it's like, I didn't really think that, is that someone that I think could protect and provide for me? And I mean, probably not. But if I can own my emotions, and that might speak to stoicism too. And I know that there's a common misperception of stoicism is emotionless, and to me it's quite the opposite of that. It's really sort of fully acknowledging our emotions, but also not letting them fully dictate us as much as we can help it, and even giving meaning to them. But I don't know that that's how most people look at it.
One of the coolest tactics I ever learned when I was going through what I was going through was that there's communication styles that obviously individuals all have, male, female, whatever. But when you're talking to your significant other, or let's say they're in that bad space like you described, coming home from work and all fired up, my natural inclination before I learned anything about myself was to immediately start to find solutions to a problem that they don't really have, because they don't really have like, when they come home like that, or your significant other comes home like that, it's not that they actually have a problem. They're just unleashing that spitfire of emotion at you.
Yeah.
And they just need you to collect it and sit it on your shoulder and acknowledge that you're listening, and you can nod your head and maybe just them. They don't need you to start fixing and piecing together pieces that aren't really messed up. So the way that I was taught was ask your significant other is, do you want me to lend advice, or would you like me to just listen and support you? And as soon as you start to lead that conversation and open up that communication that way, everything changes.
And that's really good advice, I think. And I've certainly given that advice to a lot of people. Occasionally, I will take that further with people who probably are a little more stubborn, maybe. And I'll just be like, just assume, let your default be that she does not want you to fix it. So maybe you don't even ask, like your default, unless she explicitly asks you, hey, can you help me solve this problem? That she probably doesn't want you to help.
When is that ever going to be the case?
Right. Yeah.
Because it's in the topic of kind of behavior change for people who are struggling with things, I think, as you talked about, just men understanding maybe that orientation with stuff, I would think that perspective is a big part of this. So, and obviously everything we talk about can be very analogous to training or nutrition or whatever. When you have a guy who's dealing with some things and you're trying to get that perspective shift on doing things from a place of strength, are there things that you want this patient or this individual to start to put into practice, like action steps, maybe even right away? This is what I need you to maybe start doing so that you can start to understand this perspective shift.
Yeah, generally it's been in my clinical experience that assertiveness is the first thing to start working on, because I think assertiveness is the foundation on which everything else in a relationship has to operate on, right? And so what you might say is assertiveness is the thing that establishes order, because without order, everything that relationships need will happen haphazardly and often backfire. And so we've all had these experiences where it's like, oh, here's this really useful idea to apply in my marriage, say, and we'll do it and it doesn't work, and it may even backfire. And it's like, well, what's the environment in which you're trying to apply that sort of tactic, if you will, that relationship skill? And if it's too chaotic, it's not going to work. So assertiveness is really around boundaries and managing conflict. Okay. And so oftentimes it's like, well, you probably need to start setting some boundaries and healthy boundaries and understanding that. And it's for a long time I was collecting data on assertiveness scores with people, but I would also ask them what to self-rate their assertiveness relative to their peers. And most of the time people think they're more assertive than what they are. And there's huge misconceptions about what assertiveness is. And so I would say that's the foundation typically.
And I want to interrupt for a second, because I want anybody who's listening right now, if for the analogy of your health, your nutrition, your fitness, whatever it might be, we talk about food, our relationship with food, our relationship with alcohol, our relationship with exercise. Are you assertive at all with the food that's in your house? Are you assertive at all with your friends about things when it comes to being around alcohol? Are you assertive with your family about separating time for you to get your exercise and movement in? All those things, that's immediately what I'm hearing, even from this perspective. So as everything that's being said, whatever you're struggling with, think about how, instead of relationship with a person, think about my relationship with whatever that you are trying to work on. All these things can completely be tied together. Agree?
And then don't associate assertiveness with a negative connotation either.
Yeah.
I think people oftentimes hear assertive and probably turn that into
aggressive
in their mind to aggressive, which
yeah,
I get that shit all the time because of the way that
Yeah.
my voice is and how I just butt into everybody's life. But
yeah, like I've told my class before, it's like, if you didn't do crack and some crackhead is like, here, do some crack, you just be like, no, you wouldn't be like, I'm trying not to do crack this week. Like there's this,
well, do I have to?
Yeah. Like I'm trying to be good. I'm trying this. I'm trying this. No, I'm not drinking, or no, I don't eat that, or no, I'm not whatever, instead of, I'm on this diet, you're just justifying blah, 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 blah. So absolutely.
Here's the thing. It's like, I would rather you say no and sound like an asshole than to go along with something you don't want to, and then really have to, do some serious work later on, because you've really been dishonest the whole
Yeah.
time.
And it's only at the beginning that you feel like an asshole when you say no. Once you get used to it, you realize you're not just because we feel like an asshole doesn't mean anybody else is perceiving you as being an asshole for saying no.
Well, I would say even if they are perceiving you as an asshole, still set the boundary, right? Because at least you can have you have an opportunity to sort that out, right? Because here's the thing: if it's already chaotic, so what if you're an asshole all of a sudden? You're probably already an asshole, and so you set the boundary, you say no, you establish order. That's what it is, and guidelines, so that everything else that we need to do will be able to at least happen properly. And so I would say there probably needs to be a little bit of willingness to be an asshole. And this isn't a ticket just to be one for the sake of being an asshole. Right?
You get intention and perspective,
right?
Yeah.
Well, the perspective part is everything. If somebody perceives you as being a certain way, that's not your responsibility.
Yeah.
You can only operate from the ground that you're standing on. You have no idea how what you're going to say or do is going to affect somebody else.
You can fine tune the way that you come across, but only once you establish some assertiveness and order in your life. So I'm not going to say that that's not important, but don't put the cart before the horse, right? And so by all means, create some order, at least stabilize the situation enough so that then you can begin to sort things out. But if you're trying to be too diplomatic and you're sugarcoating things and you're protecting people from their feelings because it might be too hard for them to hear, or you're just worried about all these things, that it's not going to get you anywhere. The most important thing in that moment is to calm the storm. And then once the storm is passed, all right, we can start cleaning up and sorting this thing out.
And this is kind of like the creation of a new identity. I think a lot of people have to kind of create this new identity for themselves. It's so hard to break away from that. That's why we become so passive and we worry about everybody else's feelings and perspective of us rule our own lives. So kind of in this identity shift, step number one, start creating some boundaries, be assertive with things and kind of get used to it. You realize, you're not an asshole for being assertive and having boundaries. If somebody's starting to get used to that, is there like kind of a next step or a next thing or something else that they can be working on?
Well, there's all kinds of things. So it would be hard to say, specifically what people would need to do. But what you might say generally is like, then you could start looking at your character. And the reason I say that is because, so I sort of have these 4 pillars. It's confidence, character, frame, and assertiveness, character, frame, and then confidence, and probably in that order. But the 3 of those pillars can't be established unless the assertiveness pillar is established first. But then I say it's character, and why is that? Because to really oversimplify relationships, it's like, well, what are relationships? And you could say that they are a series of responses between 2 people. And I mean, that's not to atomize it too much there, but to get to a point. And it's like, well, okay, if that's what relationships are, then maybe the quality of those responses determines the quality of the relationship. And you could say that both people have to respond well, because if one has quality responses but the other doesn't, it's a poor relationship. And then you have to figure out what.
And is that communication? Are you speaking? Obviously, when you're talking about responses, you're talking about spoken word. Does that tie back into just the ability, and I mean, I guess people's different abilities on how to communicate properly, or whatever properly, I guess, means to that individual?
Sure. First, I would say, it is the literal words you say, but it's also so much more. I think communication is more nonverbal than verbal, and so, but it's what you say, and you want to try to be intentional with that. But I think it's also how you follow up with that and what your actions are saying too, right? Because act and nonverbal, and actions speak louder than words most of the time, I would say. But so it is what you say, but it's what can I do to respond in a quality manner so that this relationship can have quality. And it is what you say. And so it sort of produces, these pillars are also like limitations, if you will, because it's like, well, I have to operate within the bounds of these pillars. And that's hard because it's easy just to say what I want to say without having to think about it, right? But these limitations, if you will, sort of force us to be precise And the first thing I think that makes us be precise with is our character. It's like, who is it? What's the essence of us that we are going to present to in our relationship here? And so, and it kind of also speaks, if we back up for a second here, it speaks to the Nietzschean idea of he who has a why can bear almost anyhow. And so what this really gets into with people, and it's a part that you can't skip. It's like, well, why do you need to do this? What does this mean to you? And that's where it really gets individualized. It's sort of like figuring out what this means to you. Why is this important? And sometimes it's asking dumb questions. Do you want a quality relationship? Yeah, I think I do. Okay, good. Because sometimes it's like you can get in there and you realize like maybe these people don't even want to be there, you know?
Yeah.
I like the idea of can you say that again? The why and the how?
Yeah, he who has a why can bear almost anyhow. That's from Nietzsche.
Yeah. That's good. So it's the whole find your why that every nutrition and fitness person constantly posts.
Used to be on
Find
the back
think
of the
about it,
t-shirt.
right? If you have a conviction, if you really believe in something, like you're gonna stay the path, and no one's gonna be able to come along and knock you off of that path or convince you to deviate from that path, because you're gonna be like, no, I know. And why do you? Well, it's like, what do you know? It's like it's the reason for it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Somebody
you
with
understand the implications of it.
Yeah, somebody with a true why that they're super passionate about. I mean, they don't even like failure's not even failure. It's that, oh, okay, that didn't work. You know, they just post like closed doors just simply navigate you through the maze of life, versus we just closed door. Oh, that's it. And it's like, no, turn. There's fucking another hallway. Closed door, turn.
Yeah, so
it just navigates us through.
people who don't have the purpose element established enough, the why, if you will, is the second they encounter an obstacle, it just shatters their whole foundation. It's like, I don't even know who I am anymore. What am I going to do? And it's like they're starting from scratch every time they encounter an obstacle.
Would you say that's the biggest reason people get stuck in patterns, is just not really truly believing a why, or not truly believing they can change? Would they be one and the same or independent of each other?
I'm not so arrogant to think that I can narrow that down to
Yeah.
one answer. You know, I think it's pretty complex and varied. But what comes to mind when I hear you ask that or speak to that is it's almost like a societal thing here, and it's like we live in a society where it's convenience is pushed and sold to us all the time, you know.
Yeah.
And that narrative can get deeply ingrained and really interfere with your own development as a person, whether it's physically, psychologically, or whatever. And so maybe that doesn't make complete sense as far as like an answer to your question, but it's I think there's this, if it's hard, then I don't have to do it because I have this easy thing over here. Well, it's also meaningless. And the more meaningless things that we engage in and establish in our small corner of the world, I think the harder it is to understand, one, that you need that why, and which makes it even harder to find that why, because it's like you don't even know it. So what you could say is, in a different way, is no one's teaching us that we need a why.
Yeah, it's true. I'm a high school teacher, and I would agree with that. It's people don't even people. What do you want to do? What do you want to do is the question. Not who do you want to be. Not why do you want to do it. I'm always at whenever a kid says what they want their major to be, I'm always like, why? I just say why. I'm not necessarily asking them what's their why. I just want to see if they even thought about it.
You can't even question people's desires or what they express as their desire anyway. You know, well, if that's who they say they are, or what they want, then that's what we have to do. And it's like, well, if no one's challenging us, like, where's that buffer to let us know that we're going too far, you know?
Yeah.
And well, I think what that too far is nihilism. Basically, it's emptiness and just meaninglessness. And so I think that's sort of I don't know, the side effect, if you will, of this
of comfort and convenience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Society of convenience.
Yeah. Where like everybody knows, everybody has their why bother. Not a lot of people have their why.
Yeah.
I'm dropping
So
bombs today, Aram.
Well, it's also because I think the problem is we're overwhelmed with choice, and the common denominator and the common thread that I found with some of the most highly functional and highly functioning and most emotionally aware and self-sufficient people that I've ever encountered were folks that just didn't have a fucking choice. They had to operate out of necessity as opposed to just being like, well, I can just pick this, this, and this because they're available to me, and I don't
And
have
that goes
to
to the
actually.
comfort conversation. Yeah.
Right. They can revert back to a place of like, this is like door number 3 is the easiest door I can walk through. So that's the one I'm going to choose, as opposed to the individual who's like, I only have one door and that's what I'm going to, and if it's a door that's closed, I'm going to break through it, dig underneath it, or climb over the top of it because that's the only choices I have left. And those individuals, and this exists in like the single mother community that I work with. This exists in the former addicts or current addicts who are still fighting whatever they were addicted to. Those people are just really mentally tough, and they're very, very self-aware, and they have no problem admitting if they've had a bad week. Hey, listen, it was on me. It just wasn't fucking important enough for me this week. And I don't plan on you deviating off the path. I'm going to do better next week. Or, it's never, I don't have time or I can't do it. It just wasn't a priority. I didn't make time for it, and they're good to go. Yeah. And that's the best answer for them, as opposed to the other people who are like, oh, I don't know. And they're finding like, they're trying to justify their poor time management skills. They're trying to justify their lack of prioritization. So yeah, you can spend, I could justify anything. I ordered $75 worth of Grubhub last night because it was healthy.
Thursday. It's Thursday.
Right,
he does that every Thursday. It's a problem. He's
apparently I need to charge more.
It's the only it's the only thing he talks to his therapist about is his Thursday night Grubhub order. And he had to stop buying eggs from Grubhub because he got 3 of them for $75 last week. So now he's done buying eggs from Grubhub.
Well, and he's still talking about it after all this time. He's bribing his therapist, apparently.
and I don't want to. I think I don't say that to come from a place of invalidating excuses or individual limitations, because everybody has their own barriers that are very real to them. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think the problem with barriers is if you continue to see them as that, they're going to continue to be that, as opposed to trying to strategize ways around it.
Yeah. I was thinking about your comments earlier about it doesn't take long to identify people who call their patterns flukes. Oh, that was a fluke, and this is it. But it's like, no, it's not a fluke, it's a pattern, and you can see the people who, maybe they have an off day or an off week and they're getting right back to it. And okay, that was a fluke, those people. But so this whole idea of barriers and limitations, right? There's an idea that I've been grappling with for a couple of years now, and it's I haven't really formulated a complete thought with it, but I think it's relevant to this conversation. And it's the notion of limitations and existence. And it's like we exist because of limitations, right? And of course, it gets really philosophical, but I think it's relevant. And so this idea of freedom that we have. So we talk about the society of comfort and convenience. Well, it's like we want freedom, and it's like, well, I don't really think we know what that is, or most people don't anyway. Maybe none of us truly know what it is. I think some of us are trying, right? But we think that, well, I can be anything I want, but if you could be anything, then are you really anything at all? And probably not. So there's this reluctance. And so I think it's an attitude, it's an orientation to those barriers and those limitations, if you will. And they can certainly feel, constrictive and choke you out, but it's kind of to my reference earlier, it forces you to be precise. And when you can be precise with yourself, you sort of shed all that's not necessary. And this, to me, really allows you to experience the most important aspects of yourself, but not without having subjected yourself to those limitations. So, for example, it's like I'm a father, and before I had a kid, I always wanted to be a father. I knew that for a long time. But even though I wanted to, didn't mean that I was a father. And it didn't mean that I can tell you what it's like to be a father. I can imagine what it's like, but I couldn't live that out until I fathered a child. Yeah. And so it was only then, and well, being a father typically comes with some limitations. You're not just going to be able to do anything and everything you want, because now you have a child to father. And so it's like, if I neglect my child, if I abandon her, then I actually step outside of those limitations, and maybe while on paper I'm still a father, I think psychologically, even spiritually, I'm not, because I'm not allowing myself to operate within those limitations. And so for me to experience that very important aspect of myself, then I have to subject myself to those limitations. And so just kind of an idea of those this limitations in existence and our attitude towards limitations. And it's like I kind of wrote this thing down the other day trying to figure out like what's the feedback loop that we have in that. And it seems like the feedback loop might be something to the effect of we think that freedom absolves responsibility, and absolved responsibility has no limitations, but no limitations brings no freedom. And I think maybe the positive feedback loop in that is, yeah, freedom is responsibility, because it's like you have to really be precise with yourself, and there's usually people that depend on you for something or another, and that responsibility is a limitation, but those limitations produce true freedom to really experience the most important aspect of myself.
100%. It's like, I mean, imagine driving if there was no laws. There'd be no freedom in driving. You'd have no idea where to go and when. It's like the analogy of the dog on a leash versus off leash. The dog that understands the instructions from the owner, the stop, come, heel. They can be off leash. They have all the freedom in the world at that park because the dog comes. But the dog who has no rules, no boundaries, they have to stay leashed. You know, and I think that sometimes even with somebody with the identity switch, there's that fear that there's going to be too much restriction doing a lifestyle change. Well, I don't want to be that person who's like, it's all about the gym and da, 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 da. And that's like they're resisting this change, but then they keep battling with it because they know the restrictions they have from being comfortable sitting on the couch. They know the restrictions they have. They're sucking wind going up the stairs. They can't carry things. They know that they can't provide for their family maybe as well as they could if they had some more structure. Maybe we start using the word structure instead of discipline, because I do hate when I hear these people online like, you just need discipline. Like, it's so fucking easy to just magically whim up discipline. But, you know, structure might be a word that somebody could maybe, I don't know, identify with a little bit better and accept.
Well, it kind of makes me think of the term "fake it till you make it," and some people have a problem with that, and I can understand that, and I've sort of rephrased that. It's much longer, but it's behave in ways that are indicative of the person you want to be and the experience you want to have.
Yeah. Act as if, like an act as if kind of a thing.
So you've seen this, right? Well, that isn't me, or I don't feel like that's authentic because now I can't do it because I'm not genuine and authentic with it. Well, it's like, can you be genuine and authentic with something you've never done? You can't. And so you're going to be awkward and silly with something you've never done before. That's why we call
being
it
assertive. Like being assertive.
Exactly.
Step one. Yeah. Absolutely. It's really uncomfortable the first time you're doing those things.
And I think it's interesting that you were able to paint the word limitation in such a positive light. And it's because the way that you use the word limitation wasn't actually limiting. It was more focused. And that's really what it comes down to. It's like, it's not necessarily that we need like this universal amount of discipline. It's that, are you focused on something? Like when you wake up every single day, is your brain just this jumbled mess of things that are going on? Or are you actually getting up with a clear head and being focused? And are you living a life of focus? Like, I know for me, I'm on a fucking mission every single day, and I will plow through whatever it takes and through whoever, and set as many boundaries as I need to get to that focal point that I'm like that North Star that you were talking about earlier.
Which is an erection for him. It's just every day he just wants to try to get one.
It's at this age.
At least every morning.
I'm sorry.
At this age, it's really just it's an achievement for a reason.
Pseudo achievement at this age.
I think the problem is a lot of people, like you said, it comes down to that why and comes down to that focus. You're not being limited to the foods you eat. You're not being limited by exercise. You're not being limited by any of this stuff. What you're actually doing is you're finally honoring the things that you're not good at and getting slowly better at them. But with that responsibility and that structure comes a whole world of freedom that you've never seen before because you've never lived as that person.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Exactly what Ed was saying before. Yeah.
Yeah, to see it in the work that you two do, and to think of that notion of limitations in existence, it's okay. You can call it discipline, but I like the focus notion better, because even if you think about our vision, like our literal vision, it's like it's the actual pinpoint, the most focused area of our vision is really, really small, all things considered. And the more that, I mean, think about it, we don't see 360.
Yeah.
We can't. Like, I don't even know if we would know how to navigate this world if we did, right? And so, but it's like our
That would be
focus is,
wild.
it has to be. That's now we're getting into, evolution in a sense, as far as like why focus is important, and I think you can find all kinds of implications to that. But yeah, it's focus, but with the aim that if I focus on this, I can actually attain a higher, more meaningful existence, because I'm actually going to not perfect something, but become more complete and whole with something, versus just absolutely incomplete with everything.
Yeah.
No,
You
you're
should.
becoming a leader in that thing. And I think that's the problem with a lot of people who either choose occupations or they choose mates, whatever it is. They pigeonhole themselves into this thing because they think that's the best thing for them in that moment, and they can't see beyond that at all. Even just something as simple as a relationship, like you end up marrying the chick that you went to high school with, and then you say out loud over and over in your life that that was my soulmate. How the fuck do you know? You've never been to Sri Lanka. You've never been to St. Petersburg. How do you know
Yeah.
that you couldn't have met somebody there that was more aligned with your belief system and your values? You just chose that person, you hitched your wagon to it, and that was it, purely based out of geography and
Yeah,
circumstance.
the soulmate notion is tricky and can get you in trouble, because it's like you begin to take people for granted, or you do things out of obligation. It's like, do you want an obligatory marriage?
Oh, don't get me started on that. I did a podcast with somebody the other day,
Oh yeah.
and to me, and I'm not somebody that's like, don't get married, but when you inside, like, loyalty inside of a marriage, to me, could not be more obligatory if you had chains around you. To me, the best type of relationship is both of us can leave at any fucking moment, but we choose not to. Now I have the ultimate choice, and I'm choosing you on an hourly, daily basis when I have all these other choices. Because the second that you're set up in that obligation, that's it. We have a house together, we have a kid together, we have a piece of paper that binds us, we have taxes together. It's a lot more complicated for me to leave because now I have no fucking choice.
Yeah. Well, I think marriage, just across the board, is the relationship with more implications than any other relationship. And so when you talk about, so I talked about earlier, my niche is male psychological development in the context of relationships. Well, that's because I think that that's primarily where our psychological development occurs anyway. Like, on what stage does it occur, right? That development and its relationships. Well, which relationship has the most implications? And it seems to be the case that it's marriage for the most part, and maybe followed by parent-child relationships and other familial relationships and so on. And so it's like, yeah, I do think that there's a that it's necessary to be willing to leave, but I think it's equally necessary to be willing to bind yourself to that person and say, hey, we're going to do this, and we're going to stick it out, and we're going to figure it out. Because if we don't, then we're not going to be able to really develop as individuals. So we kind of need each other in that sense. It's not some codependency thing. It's an understanding of well, our psychological development, or spiritual development, if you will. And so I like that, because I think that we need to understand, hey, you could go, and I need to know that, so that I don't take you for granted. And so that and so that you're not, I don't want you to be obliged to be here. I want you to want to be here. But also understanding that, what's the highest aim here, and it's to figure life out together, that we need to be able to share that. Because if we don't, well, Jordan Peterson has a video called The Shackles of Marriage. If you haven't seen it, I recommend you watch it. It's kind of comical, but he makes a lot of points. And I think his notion is, if you can run away, then you don't have to tell each other the truth.
Yeah.
And if you don't have anyone to tell the truth with, like, you're never going to be able to sort yourself out. And so it may seem like it conflicts with your comment earlier of like, I need to be willing to leave. I need that. But I don't think that those two are diametrically opposed, so to speak. I think you can reconcile those two things.
Yeah.
Need to know that you could. But above that, I think it's, well, we need to commit to each other, because if I can easily trade you in, then I can do that every time, and I never really have to face myself.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
But don't you think that comes down to human nature and the concept of like always having that dangling carrot in front of you?
Well, the temptation's real.
Well, you know what I mean? Like I think a lot of marriages or relationships fail for two reasons: complacency and lack of communication. And you can easily solve complacency with the dangling carrot aspect. Like I know that she can leave at any moment because she's got 1,000 better options within a 5 mile radius of me. So I better fucking show up. And you have to learn how to communicate with one another and understand that you're two separate people that are bound together because you chose to be. Doesn't mean you can't grow together, but separately, right? Like you don't have to do everything attached at the hip. And I think that level of independence is important.
Well, first of all, I want to say that's really cool that you have a large radius. I'm kind of jealous that 5 miles is a large radius. But, so
I don't like to drive drunk to my girlfriend's house.
He has a big
Right.
social media following. His radius would be much larger than us.
Yeah, but my physical
I'm
radius
sure.
is small because I am not willing to have to shower before every one of these encounters.
If you notice in his examples, he said Sri Lanka, so he has a very large radius. Since Sri Lanka was one of the,
I don't know why that came up to mind
Yeah.
first, by the way. Like
Yeah, it
Yeah,
clearly
the
there's
40-inch
something.
slip, maybe.
it
Yeah.
wasn't a different part of America. Anyway, I interrupted.
Is that in Florida?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. There's a Sri Lankan supermarket somewhere in Fort Lauderdale.
I'm sure of it.
But I think it's interesting to note that, you know, and I've battled with this myself, and I was somebody who spent my entire youth and early adulthood deriving my self-worth because of a relationship. And if she didn't idolize me and think I was the best thing in the world, I had no value whatsoever. And it wasn't until I gave that up that I started having more quality relationships.
Maybe it's your fear of being abandoned in a marriage that keeps you away from the marriage, and you're more willing to just be like, okay, you bounced. We weren't married anyway. You got a wall up there, buddy.
I'm probably one of the most open and willing individuals on the planet. If I had a strong enough desire for marriage, like I don't want to do anything that I can't live without. Like I can't live without nutrition and fitness. Like if I didn't have this business, I would have zero purpose to live. But I've never woken up one day and been like, you know what? I have to get married, or else my life doesn't have any meaning to it.
It's the person. It's not the marriage.
But
person
why
that
not?
you're
But why can't you be with a person without having to marry them?
Tax breaks.
I don't think they're significant enough.
I don't think
You cannot convince me. You're still financially, you
just
cannot convince me that the tax break is always. You probably lost the tax break with the fucking wedding cost. But I mean, listen, that's a rabbit hole that we can. That's got nothing to do with
we
behavior
digress.
change.
Well,
That's not nothing to do with behavior change. But I like to be open minded about it, and I've seen so many people suffer through obligatory bounds of one another purely because they were with the wrong person, and they've been socially conditioned to think that I have to be with somebody in order to be a better man or a better person.
Man.
Earlier I brought up how assertiveness is the foundation, and it's so if you think about assertiveness as boundaries, I think in relationships there are two kinds of boundaries. There's the line in the sand, right? So it's like, if you cross this line, then you violate me and there will be consequences. And but also that line in the sand allows enough space between you two so you can remain individuals and not get enmeshed. And to sound a little more poetic, you might say, it's like that space between allows love to flow through, right? Like all the joy and the harmony and things like that, right? But if all you do is create space and there's nothing behind you to buffer, then you would just maybe create so much space to where there's no more relationship. And so the second kind of boundary is sort of a perimeter. So you have to put something around that, right? And that serves a dual purpose. It kind of sounds like you're trapping someone in there, but no, it's like it's not back so far out, so there's not a marriage or not marriage relationship, but it's also to prevent other things coming in to impede that relationship. So it's like I have small dogs and I have fence in the backyard, and it keeps them from running out in the road and getting run over, but it might keep the neighbor's large dog from coming over and attacking my dog, right? And so that perimeter is really important, but equally it's that that line between. So I say relationships have three aspects. There's me, there's you, and then there's a relationship as a whole. And I think it's like if you don't pay attention to both boundaries, then I don't think you're going to get as much meaning out of that as you could. And that's best case scenario. I think worst case is that you're going to be miserable, and who knows what that relationship is going to do. And
yeah, I was gonna say, like, whether you're in a committed dating relationship, fully committed relationship, or married, it's still all the same boundaries. You just can get out easier. So if you're really committed to your dating relationship, you're the one. Every day I'm choosing you. I'm choosing you. What's the difference between staying in that or getting married? Paperwork.
A less complicated exit strategy.
Less complicated, just in case you're keeping
maybe
that would
I
be
think
it.
there's and I think this is lost on a lot of us. So just because you get married doesn't mean that you're actually experiencing this to the fullest. But I do think that rituals play a role in relationships and marriage, even if it's just psychologically, right? Because you're going through the motions and it activates something. So you talk about limitations in existence again. So I think going through a ritualistic process of sort of making this commitment in these particular kinds of ways, like that's what that's for. And it's to sort of bring online this next level of development for yourself. And so I do think that there's merit to that. But also it's like, if you're not willing to do that, then you're not willing to do that. And I don't know that I can fault you for that. And as long as the other person is willing to go along with it, then,
I guess I have a problem with pageantry when it comes to something as widespread as love. You know what I mean? Like when but I've always been like this. Like I didn't want anybody to know I graduated. I didn't want anybody to know. Like 16-year-old, like what was it, 8th grade graduation? Like who gives a shit? Just give me the certificate. Let me go to 9th grade. Like why? I've never, like with the 1-year-old birthday party that everybody gets an invite to now, and now we're celebrating the gender reveal party. Like everything is now becoming this massive, showy. Hey world, this is me, and this is what's happening, and you have to be a part of it. Look, whatever happened to like, hey, like we love each other and we go on vacations together. Nobody even knows that we're together, but our relationship is 100 times stronger than somebody else's who's constantly showing it off on social media. And I think there's merit to that also.
And I think it is too. And you certainly see that a lot where people are really showcasing things. It's maybe it's some weird form of virtue signaling too, but it's I think what it ultimately comes down to is how meaningful are we making our lives and the things that we're doing in the relationships and things like that. And it's like, it's easy to become cynical about things too. And that's not good because that just leads to meaninglessness ultimately. And so I should practice some gratitude for, the things I have in my life. But that allows me to see the meaning and the meaningful connections between what I'm doing here and, and the implications of that in a meaningful way. And I think ultimately that does lead to a deepened sense of purpose. But I think ultimately it's let's find the meaning, or at least create meaning. Let's give what we're doing meaning, whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah, I think people can spend a whole lot of time searching for answers when you are the answer, and you just have to, like you just said, create meaning in that. There's a lot of people that might hate their job, and it's like, well, are you going to start doing something to love your job and be the best at your job, or are you going to leave the job? We're like searching. We think that some kind of mystical thing is going to happen on the outside to completely transform our lives when we have all the power inside ourselves to do this. And why are we not making the most out of the opportunities that we have, whether you're married and miserable or just in a committed dating relationship better than everybody else, like some people, like whatever it is, so it's, yeah.
Don't fault me for being a free spirit.
No, not you, other people.
I also think it comes down to the fact that like there's an obligation. I think the obligation really doesn't need to be to somebody else. Like first address the obligation to yourself. No, like, but seriously,
I thought you were going somewhere else. Then you're talking about the relationship.
No, I want to tie it back to behavior change and why people can't get out of their own way. And I think it's purely because, whether you're a parent, whether you're a spouse to somebody, and if you have these built-in limitations, like I can't find time to do X, or I don't want to do this because of this, it's going to affect the lives of these other people. Like something as simple as like, why can't you cook a meal that's individual to yourself because you live in a household of 3 kids and a husband? Like, well, I have to also cook for them, and then the kids won't eat what I eat. So, okay, yes, you guys are a household, but you're also a separate entity within that household, and your health, if it suffers, are you going to make it because of the other entities in your household, or are you going to actually be able to take ownership and say, I can spend the extra 10 minutes to cook my own meal because it's individually specific to what my requirements are, and I don't have to appease these other people? And there's nothing wrong with that.
It's the adage, if you can't pour from an empty cup, and
Right.
I tell people all the time, like, people should not be your purpose. They should be the beneficiary of your purpose. And we do that all the time. Like, I live for my kids, and if something happened to my kids, I would die, or I would just be miserable. And if I hear that, I'll say, okay, so go tell your kid that right now, and tell me what they say. And you know what they're going to say, like, no, if I die, I want you to keep living and to be happy. But the problem with making people our purpose, though, is like that forces them into a role that isn't theirs. It forces them to live to serve your purpose and not their own.
Yeah.
And that's where the obligation comes in. I think it's so it's like, but that's harder too, because it's like, oh, here's someone I love. Oh, I have a wife now, or I have a husband, or I have a kid, and they can be my purpose now. I finally found my purpose, right?
Yeah.
And it's like wrong. And you find out about that, and people are really resistant to that, because it's like, well, now I have to take an even deeper dive. I thought I found it, but I was clueless. And so how the hell do I find my purpose? But it's like, you got to try. But I think sometimes people need that contrast of realizing how damaging their ideals are about that. And it's like, yeah, you can go ahead.
See, I love that line, that people should not be your purpose. They should be the beneficiary of your purpose.
Yeah.
I think it's great. And even in the meantime, if you don't know what your purpose is, you might as well feel fucking good.
Yeah.
Treat yourself better. You know what I mean? Stop being a tool. I mean, in high school, it's like you would call somebody a hammer because they're a tool. They did what everybody else wanted them to do. You're a freaking hammer. It's like, grow up. Let's not be tools anymore that everybody else is using us, and not letting everybody else's viewpoints be what our decisions are based on. I want to be the fun one in my group. I don't want to stop drinking because then they won't want to hang out with me. I got to eat this. And I even feel like sometimes people are trying to prove so hard that they don't care what people think, that it's a detriment to them. Like, I don't care what people think. Look at me. And they're drinking and eating, and just like, I don't care what anybody thinks. And then they destroy themselves. And you're trying so hard to prove that it's to a detriment. But I think that's a great line. I think a lot of parents, family people that might be listening to this can really identify with that line of, don't let people be your purpose. Let them be.
Well, we talk about behavior change, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, sometimes if you can have a shift in your perceptions and orientations and attitudes for some things, then it creates questions. Well, then, okay, well, then what is my purpose? Or sometimes I'll just ask people, and it seems like one of those dumb, obvious questions that we don't need to ask, but sometimes are the very questions we need to ask is, well, who do you want to be?
Yeah.
No one's really even thought to ask a lot of people that question, right? And it's a fool's question, but like, it's a legitimate question. And you'll see, like, most people struggle to articulate who they want to be.
Yeah.
But it's presenting that question to people. It's like, okay, well, who do I want to be? Now they carry this question, and as they're going through their day-to-day lives and they have choices, so this was getting to behavior. Now it's like, okay, the next behavior that I exhibit, what am I basing that on? And maybe I base it on the question of who I want to be. Yeah. And even though that's not very, high up the hierarchy of your own life, it leads us to way out of the bottom, or at least further from the bottom. And so it's like, well, I tell people all the time, I'm not here to deliver answers. I'm here to help you develop a process. So I deliver processes to people. And it's like, what question do you need to ask yourself to get the ball rolling, right? And so, okay, I've got a choice to make here. I don't know who I want to be. I don't even really know what the right thing to do here, but let me ask the question. And psychologically, what happens is that when we ask the question, it's like we begin to we open ourselves up to see the answer, so to speak. And you might even call that surrender. There's a notion of the spirit of surrender being a spiritual principle. And I think what happens there, it's like saying, I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know what to do. I don't know who I am, or whatever the thing is, but I want to know, but I don't. And you sort of throw your hands up in the air, and it sort of relaxes you and I think psychologically, and that opens you up to see things that have been there but were obscured because you were so sort of tense and bound up and restricted because you really had no idea who you were, and you were following this route that really didn't serve you well. And so
Yeah.
there's an element of surrender there that I think is necessary, but it's what question do you need to ask yourself, and you'll begin to figure that out.
Yeah. And I think if somebody doesn't know who they want to be, they might at least be able to identify the actions that I'm doing now are what I don't want to be. You know, even if they can't figure that, if that makes any sense. Like, I know what I don't want to be as a person who sits around and watches TV and scrolls TikTok all day and never moves my body. I know that drinking every single weekend and being hungover is not who I want to be. So maybe even in just that question then can possibly prompt the person to start recognizing what behavior they don't want to be. So until they figure
I
out
agree. You have to have
they
a
do want to
starting
be.
point, right?
Yeah.
And so at least don't be this, but you
Yeah.
want to try to move away from that as fast as possible, because what happens is that if the only thing that you can describe is who you don't want to be, well, it's like the language that we use sort of creates the image that we have of ourselves. So we have this self-image based on the language that we use, and our brain, that part of the brain, you might say, is very literal, right? So if you say, I want to be the kind of person who doesn't buckle under pressure. Well, the image that's going to create is someone who buckles under pressure, even though on this other level, you say, I don't want to be that person.
Yeah.
That part of the brain that has to do with self-image doesn't recognize that part that says don't want to be. All they see is the image that can come out of that. So you might say, I want to be the kind of person who handles pressure well. And it may seem like, semantics there, but it's nuanced, I think, because it's an important distinction to make, because it really shifts your self-image. And the more that you do that, well, the reason for that is because our behaviors tend to gravitate towards the image that we have of ourselves.
And our brain can't process the negative.
Right.
Like that whole thing, like even like in AA, they tell you don't think about not drinking. Like you can't sit there and think, don't drink today, don't drink. Shift your focus to God. In at least the AA example, we can't be thinking, because when we're thinking about not drinking, we're thinking about drinking. Don't think of a blue elephant. You think of a blue elephant. That whole thing. Yeah.
Big shocker when you continue to sabotage yourself. And and this isn't about some silly positive affirmations. This is with the intent of like, what image am I creating for myself? But sometimes we need reference points, and I think this is where it's important to look to inspiration outside of you. It's like, well, who are some people that whether you know them or somebody on TV or social media that you never met, like, what are some aspects about them that you think could serve you, and maybe you can emulate that, right? Maybe you can incorporate that into some idea of yourself that you might want to be, knowing that you have the option to always modify that down the road, but get some kind of starting point. And we usually need to do that by looking outside of ourselves for inspiration.
I love it. I think you gave a lot of solid stuff for people to start thinking about, and like solid groundwork, solid mindset shifts, solid perspective shifts. That no matter what area they're talking about, and we love talking about men and women as well too, and the differences. And I think that those are always good conversations to have. Aram, did you have anything that you wanted to add or ask?
No, I mean, I just want to end it with the idea that you don't have to have all the answers. And you don't have to operate from a place of knowing everything, because you probably don't. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I would rather see people have imperfect attempts with a good intention. And that's all I care about. Yeah.
Mistakes are the foundations of truth.
Yep. I mean, you're never going to learn. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 38 years spinning around this thing, and I still have a ton to figure out, and I'm not going to stop learning or trying until the lights go out.
Well, I like to say this right here because I think it's fitting maybe to wrap up with on my end. It's like it's been a couple of years. So I have a daughter, she's 11, and so a couple of years ago she was doing some homework, and I'm sort of helping her with that, and she gets really frustrated and sort of like slams her pencil down and says, "I don't know the answer," like just frustrated, and really bothered by it. And I was just like, "Baby, you don't go to school because you go to school to learn." And I've thought about that a lot, right? And so you alluded to that in a way. It's like, maybe we're not here to know, maybe we're here to learn. And to me, that's almost less is more, because it's pressure off of me. It's like, I don't have to know all these things. I don't have to know all the answers. Maybe my job is to try to figure them out. And I can do that. I can try to figure something out.
I like it.
And why wouldn't you? And why wouldn't you? Right? I mean, like people are always like so consumed with this idea of like perfection and don't act and don't do something until you know it's absolutely perfect. But you'll never know until you try.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of that idea of if I'm not authentic with something, then I can't do it because that's not right. And it's like, well, you can't become authentic until you actually do the thing. So at some point, you can plan and strategize all you want, but you have to take that leap of faith and take some action. And nothing changes unless you move and you take action. You can analyze it all day long, but that doesn't change anything ultimately.
Absolutely. Amen. And then how can people, if they want to follow you on social media, I know you're on Instagram, tell them your Instagram handle. And if you have a website, or if you do virtual consultations, or if you do any of that kind of stuff, let us know any of that.
Yeah. So social media, pretty much just active on Instagram, and it's ed.nissen. It's ed.nissen. My website that you can find me on and reach me at is ednissen.com. Again, it's ednissen, ednissen.com. And that's pretty straightforward there.
Nice. We'll be looking for the dissertation to come out.
That's right.
Ram's gonna have to read that. He might figure out his whole life after reading that.
We'll find an audiobook. We don't read.
I'm still trying
I get my southern accent and charm on the audiobook.
I would be hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah.
You can
I
be
didn't
giving me an
hear
apple
anything
pie
Ed
recipe.
said. I just heard his voice, and it's just soothed me all day. So
I'm soothed. I'm completely soothed.
Yeah, we're both like very aggressive, and you're so calm, and it's nice. I tried listening to Matthew McConaughey's audiobook, and I had to stop real quick. Hey, all right, now, his was too much for me. I couldn't do it.
That might be tough to get past.
Green lights. I couldn't do it. But anyway, thanks, Ed. I really appreciate it. I think it was a good conversation. I think a lot of people can definitely learn a lot. And I really hope that people just go back and listen to some of those chunks, some of those sections that can really help with that perspective shift. I think that a lot of people struggle with just identity, perspective shift, and like you said, setting boundaries. And yeah, so I appreciate you. Thank you. And I'll be continuing to follow you on social media. I appreciate your time.
Yeah,
thank you, Ed,
for having me.
Absolutely.